It takes a special man or woman to be known as the boss, especially in WWE. It requires consistent characterization, a level of performance as good as, if not better than, that of their superstar peers, as well as identifiable motivations and a general connection to the audience. Over the years, we've had dozens of them, from the outright weird and scandalous, to celebrities good and bad, right over to one-night-only bosses like Dean Ambrose. Who remembers that one? As such, there are plenty to choose from when coming up with your favorite, but don't worry about racking your brains trying to remember exactly who was the best, because I've got your back. What a guy. I'm Adam Pachisi from Cultaholic.com, and these are the 10 best WWE authority figures. Join us! Number 10, Daniel Bryan. Yes, yes, yes. We start with everyone's favorite goat-face comeback king, Daniel Bryan. The SmackDown Live general manager of almost the entire brand split era, Daniel Bryan was an incredibly well-written character throughout his tenure, rarely straying from the realms of believability and always seeming to have genuine motivations, which is more than can be said for the majority of superstars. His presence in the role will probably be best remembered for his talking smack moment with The Miz or the announcement of his return, both of which somewhat overshadow a GM who gave as good as he got and was always a welcomed presence on WWE TV. He had balls too. Remember when he outright fired AJ Styles just weeks before WrestleMania? Or when he endlessly called out Shane McMahon on his BS? He was charismatic, presented as a genuine and overall good babyface authority figure, something which is somewhat of a rarity as you'll find out through the course of this list. Number 9, Mick Foley. Mick Foley was the authority figure on Monday Night Raw over two different periods of time, 2000 to 2001 and 2016 to 2017. And although his latter reign is best remembered for the verbal beatings he took at the behest of Stephanie McMahon with absolutely zero retribution, his reign as Commissioner Foley was absolutely a run to remember. Acting as the Commissioner in amongst the McMahon-Austin Rock era and the development of Shane and Stephanie McMahon as power-hungry spoiled brats, Foley was a welcomed babyface for the heels to play off against, often booking matches without their permission and to their regret. During this tenure, he was the man who announced tables, ladders, and chairs, oh my! And he developed an incredibly funny on-screen relationship with one of those teams, Edge and Christian. He somewhat hilariously used to hold office in a random corridor of the arena, setting up a table with a handmade Commissioner sign pinned to it. This was, of course, just a part of his role as comic relief to the often intense and angry feuds going on around him, cheap pops and all. In many ways, Foley parodied himself and wrestling in general while playing the role of Commissioner, and with great effect. So while his second run as an on-screen authority figure may have left a bitter taste in the mouth, it was at one stage a much welcome throwback to his much more beloved tenure as a centerpiece Raw character, one of the best authority figures in WWE history. Number 8, Gorilla Monsoon. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more respected man in WWE history than Gorilla Monsoon. The one-time wrestler turned full-time commentator turned on-screen authority figure is by all accounts the nicest guy you could ever think to meet, even in the dark world of wrestling politics, and is so beloved by the McMahon family that he was one of the very few respected folks the McMahons considered handing the responsibility of the company to should Vince McMahon have been found guilty in his 1994 public trial. As such, his on-screen presence was much the same. He was a gentle giant who demanded respect, but never seemed to overstep his boundaries, often dealing out fair but firm punishments, and mostly only ever after being prodded endlessly to do so. He was the sort of nice guy you could see running a family business. The sort of man who wanted everyone to get along and be friends, to fight only in the name of competition and not disrespect. Ironically, as a wrestler, he was a hugely monstrous villain who fought bears and drank his victims' blood. Yet, despite this being well known during his time as an on-screen WWF president between 1995 and 1997, he was almost the personification of a gentle giant, garnering some of the most universally positive reactions of any WWE authority figure in wrestling history. Number 7, Teddy Long. You will go one-on-one with The Undertaker. Theodore R. Long, or Teddy Long as we've affectionately grown to call him, was about as reliable as the sun coming up for the WWE and its viewers in the decade of the 2000s. He transitioned from manager turned wrestling personality to referee and then to general manager by 2004, working as the on and off again head honcho of SmackDown for around 10 years, including a feud with John Laurinaitis. Yes, a feud. That wasn't wasn't so good. His reign at the head of the WWE's Blue Brand was seemingly never all that spectacular, yet it remains one of the most memorable and certainly one of the most quotable. Even the general managers of today quote him while booking a tag team match player. His entire persona was memorable, from his unique music to his oversized suits and his beautifully strange dancing. For an entire decade, he may have flown under the radar as nothing more than a storytelling device whose function was to make matches, but in being such a unique and somewhat lovable constant, he actually forged quite a noteworthy legacy, making him an absolute cert for any list about the WWE's all-time great authority figures. I guess like this one. Number 6, Jack Tunney. If you're a new fan, you could be forgiven for not knowing who Jack Tunney is, because the WWE have been pretty insistent on making sure that no mention is ever made of him on TV, the reasons for which are somewhat murky at best. The Canadian wrestling promoter turned on-screen personality was employed by Vince McMahon to act as the on-screen president of the then WWF, a role similar to today's general manager role. And he was so great at it because of how little he actually showed up. Think of him as a good version of Stephanie McMahon. Working as the figurehead of the on-screen World Wrestling Federation for 11 years, Tunney was only present because of great controversies or the need to announce special occasions and/or changes. At the time, Vince McMahon wanted to be known as the announcer and not the owner of the company, so Tunney effectively played the McMahon character between 1984 and 1995. Perhaps his most famous decision was to strip Ted DiBiase of the WWF Championship after DiBiase had bought the belt from Andre the Giant. But he was also known for suspending people for cheating, including even the referees. His role, in effect, was to be the moral compass of the organization, and he did that very well for a very long time. Number 5, Vickie Guerrero. Okay. Headphone users, don't hate me for this. Excuse me! It was just like that. Ask anyone from the time Vickie's husband Eddie was alive what would come of Mrs. Guerrero in the world of wrestling, and they'd have probably told you not that much. She was a bit part player on WWE TV as part of the Who's Your Pappy storyline between Eddie and Ray, but had famously missed her cue to the rage of Eddie himself at one of their confrontations, and was about as unconvincing as anyone involved in the storyline in terms of her acting, and that includes Ray's kid Dominic, who was about 8 at the time. Nevertheless, she became a huge source of empathy from the WWE audience in the aftermath of her husband's unexpected and untimely death, becoming an on-screen presence shortly thereafter as part of the Chavo Guerrero vs. Rey Mysterio feud of the following year. An ordinary woman, a loving mother, and a widow, it seemed Vickie had being a so-called good guy in the bag, but the WWE had different plans. Excuse Me was born, and Vickie Guerrero became arguably the most over heel in the entirety of wrestling at one stage in her run. People just loved to boo her. Her character was one who'd do anything for the men in her life, whether it be Chavo Guerrero, Edge, or Dolph Ziggler, and she'd often make shamefully biased decisions. But it was less about what she did and more about how she did it, because the secret to Vickie's success was establishing a Bobby Heenan-esque level of vulnerability that acted as the character's motivation to control, manipulate, and even bully. Her annoying, whiny delivery of lines were a heat magnet so large many wrestlers could only ever dream of achieving the reactions that she got. Remember the time she was in the ring with John Cena and the reaction was so loud and prolonged that Cena himself couldn't hear a word she was saying? That about sums her up. She was a classic on-screen WWE character whose portrayal of an authority figure is hard to rival. Number 4, Paul Heyman. Like many of Paul Heyman's roles throughout his pro wrestling career have been over quicker than a hiccup, so was his run as general manager of SmackDown. But just like his work as a manager, an advocate, and a booker, his short tenure at the forefront of the Blue Brand was impactful, entertaining, and influential to say the least. Acting as general manager of SmackDown between 2003 and 2004, while reportedly an important part of the creative team on the brand at the time, Heyman's on-screen presence was obviously a gift to the heels of the show's programming, and thus acted as a strong platform for top babyfaces like Eddie Guerrero to spring from as reluctant, anti-authority babyfaces overcoming the odds time and time again. Being as brutal and creative on the mic as he currently is had its benefits, and his tenure being so close to the Monday Night Wars and the closure of ECW ensured that his words still held brevity whenever he opened his mouth. As such, he had memorable encounters with the likes of Guerrero, John Cena, and Chris Benoit, the latter of whom annoyed him so much that he booked him into the #1 spot at the Royal Rumble, a match that Benoit would go on to win. The most memorable part of Heyman's tenure as SmackDown general manager is, however, without a doubt, his exit from the role during the 2004 draft lottery. The whole night, Heyman had been going head-to-head with his Raw counterpart for the best talent on the roster, bragging every time he picked up a name from the lottery ball pot. By the show's end, Heyman celebrated by picking out the final ball for his opponent Eric Bischoff, the final ball had the name Paul Heyman on it. The GM of SmackDown had been drafted to Raw. Heyman quit immediately and wasn't seen on TV again until a brief run as the on-screen and behind-the-scenes spearhead of the new ECW 2 years later. Number 3, William Regal. William Regal has been such a great authority figure that he's the only person on our list that the WWE have brought back 3 different times across 3 separate eras, and the only one who remains ever present to this day. The Blackpool-born brawler has always held the advantage of portraying a posh British man, perhaps the most archetypal of all authoritarian bad guy characters in American pop culture history, which made him one of the easiest characters to detest throughout his first run as authority figure between 2000 and 2001. The so-called man's man was reduced into being a cowardly heel in backstage segments as Commissioner of Raw, but had the sort of ruthless streak in the ring that made him a viable dictator. One who watched over Raw simply to open doors for himself as opposed to advancing the brand as a whole. His run was so successful that the WWE brought him back for a second go-around between 2007 and 2009 with much the same idea as before. Have him use his power in the boardroom to enhance his career in the ring. During this run, he was given the opportunity at a main event angle in which he would win King of the Ring, turn off the lights during Raw at his own behest, and even earn a WWE title shot. Were it not for a failed drugs test, this could have been the single greatest run of Regal's in-ring career. What a missed opportunity. He has, of course, been brought back a 3rd time as the on-screen figurehead of the NXT brand, an extension of his usual duties of talent scouting and masterclass hosting with the developing talent at the WWE's Performance Center. In his role, Regal has managed to recreate himself as a man of high moral standing who demands respect and inflicts his authority with a firm but fair presentation. This evolution and the way it's molded to the very fabric of the NXT brand only confirms how much of an intelligent talent Regal is and how much of a sensational authority figure he has been over the years. Number 2, Eric Bischoff. From the moment the once evil leader of the so-called opposition entered the WWE, it was clear what a huge figure on WWE programming he would become, and perhaps even more clear what an astronomically huge heel he would be from that day forward. Prancing onto the stage with a Cheshire Cat grin on his face, Bischoff embraced his employer Vince McMahon for an almost uncomfortably long time, twice. The pair then shook hands and held one another's arms aloft, with Bischoff going on to make a braggadocious promo that Jim Ross would sit and scoff at throughout, ensuring we all knew what a bastard Bischoff would be. It was the perfect introduction for a character who basically established the modern-day role of general manager on WWE television, and a person who would become a prominent figure opposite the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin and even John Cena in the years to come, memorably firing Chris Jericho for being unable to strip Cena of the WWE Championship in 2005. His tenure would last 3 years in total from 2002 to 2005 and see him eventually ousted from the WWE by means of a trial of pomp and circumstance, and being literally carried into a dumpster truck by owner Mr. McMahon. From start to finish, he was the consummate heel, and even without his run in charge of WCW, both on screen and behind the scenes, one of the best authority figures in wrestling history. Number 1, Mr. McMahon. It simply couldn't be anybody else. The evil Mr. McMahon character has been described by people inside and outside of WWE as being the very greatest heel in the history of wrestling, and if he managed to achieve that without ever being a full-time wrestler, then surely it must mean he's the greatest authority figure ever. The true tyrant of the Attitude Era, McMahon was like Thanos in that he not only had an egomaniacal personality that ran rampant across the WWE's televised products, but that he also had the legitimate power to make half of the roster disappear with a snap of his fingers. It all started, on screen at least, with Bret Screwed Bret, and evolved into the Power Strut, the Austin feud, memorable moments like "It was me all along, Austin," and "You've ruined it, damn it, you've ruined it." He memorably won the Royal Rumble, the WWF title, and even a match with God. He was a great heel. Being the actual owner of the company and the man through whom all decisions regarding the televised product of the WWE go through means that fans have, for upwards of 2 decades, always found legitimate reasons to dislike him. Whether it was what they conceived as bad booking of their favourite wrestler, a terrible story, or the change in direction from attitude to ruthless aggression to PG, Mr. McMahon was a target they could aim their displeasure at, and he always lent into it. He was a great promo and always put so much time into making his matches as good as they possibly have been, especially especially for a guy of his age and lack of legitimate wrestling training, but better yet, he was written as the devil inside the WWE. Always pushing the company forward behind the scenes, but seemingly acting as if to hold it back while on camera. He was the perfect foil for the uber babyfaces Austin and Rock of the Attitude Era, and a worthy foe to the likes of DX, John Cena, and Daniel Bryan in the years that followed. He has been simply the greatest authority figure in the history of the WWE, and it may take an entire lifetime to see somebody, anybody, eclipse him. So that's our list. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and you can follow me on Twitter here. If you enjoy what we do here at Cultaholic, you can pledge to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/Cultaholic. And most importantly, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us.